That's crazy. Okay, we're recording. I hope things are working. Test. Okay, my voice is showing in a line. This is crazy. Okay. And I guess I will. Yeah, I'll stream the desktop with the document on it, so the stream sees or the recording sees what you guys see, and not the server. Okay, cool, cool. All right. I don't know how we start this. This is weird for me. Okay. I guess I will like read the document mostly verbatim, kind of like school presentation style, and if at any point you guys want to jump in, butt in, just talk, and I should hear you, and we'll kind of go from there. Okay, so starting off with everyone's favorite part, the eight page preface. So some prefaces, and we're gonna start with citation policy. Everyone's a big fan of citation policy. It's highly exciting. Basically, my policy on citation within this document, common knowledge claims or basic facts, will just be stated. So if I'm going to say, hey, the sky is blue, I'm not going to cite a source for that. If I say something like the sky is blue because XYZ, I might cite a source depending on how deep I go into it. I'm actually a bit inconsistent on that. I generally cite more than I would by just reading the citation policy, so I often will just cite things and link things because I think they're interesting. And then the second part, anything already covered, will just be stated. That's not really true. I will provide like exactly where I talked about it because I realize, yeah, not everyone knows exactly where things are in the giant 100-page doc as I do, so things will be back referenced for the most part unless they were very recently talked about. And then any claims on future verses or long past verses will be given passage numbers, basically like what I just mentioned. Then any specific claim that I make is going to just, be sourced. And I generally like sourcing things by putting an image, so if I scroll down here, hey, there's me getting the definition of free will, and here's the image. It's just a Google search for this one. They're usually more robust than that, than Google searches, but I don't care about a new version of Java. But, that's just this one, right? So you click on the image, and it'll link it, right? Pretty standard stuff. Cool. And then, I trust you, the reader, to be able to, look things up, but I'm not going to, if I make a crazy claim, I am going to source that. If I don't source that, call me out on it, because I don't like reading things and not knowing why they're saying the things I'm reading. Okay, cool. Comment guidelines. Similarly fun, exciting things. This everyone knows, this document is something I do for fun because I have a warped sense of excitement for some reason. And, this thing is fully commentable. You don't need an account to comment on this. Like, you can be anonymous. I don't care. You can comment. Don't give details. This is a public document. So don't use anything with your name on it. So either make a new account or use anonymous or whatever. Right? And this is just archiving rules. You guys can read that. Those aren't really important. And something that is important is that these little folders that are going to show up around the document are basically where people commented. And the comment was basically everyone within the comment chain went, yeah, this is done, and we agreed to archive it. It goes to a separate document, and they all go here, and here's the list of all of them that are archived. There's some more that are kind of hanging out around the document. I mostly archive the ones in the more heavy areas, like the preface has the most archived things because most people start there for the most part, and it is the most philosophically dense. Okay, and then just this is like subtext, and this is just the debates, and then hey guys, here's the Discord that we're currently recording this in. Everyone's a big fan of that. Okay, cool. So with that out of the way, it is the forward time. So we've gone through the preface to the preface. I know, very exciting. Let's actually do the real preface now. So the forward, I'm an atheist. I think most people here know that, and by most I mean all three of us. And for me, once I became an atheist, I was like, wowza, this is crazy, and I kind of changed my perspective, changed how I viewed the world. It was really great for me. And so the whole point of this document is basically I want to look at the Bible, right? Because one of the main things is, well, there's a few reasons, right? Main reason is I heard this quote at one point, basically, that theists have the Bible read to them, and atheists read the Bible. I'm like, yeah, I want to see if that's true. And also because I was telling a story at work. I was reading off Judges 13 to 19, which is at the moment, as of recording, as of February 26th of 2024, was my favorite, or is my favorite singular story in the Bible, and that's the story of Samson. And that's my favorite story just because of how unbelievably, unmitigatedly absurd it is. It's amazing for me. I love that story. It's like one of my. It's just I read it to people. It's like it's so funny. And then one of my coworkers at the time, well, and also now still, was like, hey, you don't haven't read the entire book of Judges, so like there's like more context. It's like I've read the entire story, but yeah, maybe there's more context. It's like, have you read it? And he goes, no, I haven't. And I'm like, it's weird that there's context required of me. I must know all the context you don't to believe, and I do to like, be like, this is weird for me. Regardless, um, like a scheduling mistake and 5 free hours I shouldn't have had later, I started this doc, and basically went from there. So, in terms of atheism, I'm consider myself an agnostic atheist. Also, guys, if I'm boring you, feel free to interrupt. Um, which is basically I believe that there is no reason to believe in a god, and so I don't. I can't say that there is no god because, well, I don't. There's too many definitions of a god, and I can't really exclude them. For example, I can't exclude a deist god, which is basically the concept: hey, a god made the world, and then he kind of just went to sleep or something, right? And he just doesn't do anything. He just popped things into existence. He might as well be a turtle. Like, we don't care. We don't know. I can't say that's not true because I have no way to prove that. I can say certain gods very much cannot be real, at least with the attributes they have attributed to them. For example, the Abrahamic God, or Abrahamic gods, because there's so many different versions of them. He's basically different gods at this point. I cannot say that I think that one's actively, provably false. And what I mean by that is, people will make up things like, no, God's unknowable, God's all whatever. But those no longer follow the attributes attributed to God. The second you go God's unknowable, which I guess I'm skipping ahead, it ruins that. So I'm not going to, skip ahead. I'm just going to get to that when we get to that. Okay, cool. And then fun stuff. Everything's in the New International Version because I like that it's really readable. And all the other stuff will be Hebrew translation into English, which is from the 1917 Jewish publication version Tanakh, which is a fun one. Okay, so here's I think most people's favorite part of the document, at least from who I've talked to. Let's define God. And these little symbols just are going to be used to reference these attributes because they come into play a lot. So, number one, God's all-powerful is kind of the big thing with God. He can do literally anything, even if it's not comprehensible. God can make a square circle if he wanted to, for if he could not be all-powerful. So, for many people, they're going to be like, no, that's not what we mean by all-powerful, so they'll try to limit God's omnipotence to what is logically possible. So, like, avoid contradictions like, what is a square circle? One of the classic examples, like this is like on the Wikipedia page, right? For example, can God create a stone so heavy he can't lift it? One of the arguments is that is a stupid thing to talk about. I'm going to dismiss that argument because it's not really an argument, right? But you can say it's pedantic, whatever. It's still important when you're defining something as like God and like, hey, here's a thing, can it do that? And it's like, I don't care. It's not a great answer. Other people will say, basically, it's not in God's nature to make a stone so heavy he can't lift it, to basically dodge the question. That's now presuming to know God's nature. Which isn't really something you can do. If he's unknowable, or if he is knowable, then you lose a bunch of defenses. Regardless, if he could do both, he's not bound by logic. The way I view it, right, and I'm not going to argue this paradox because it's a paradox. There's not much to go with from here. But how I view it, how I would answer this is, right, the problem is what we define as logical. Right? Logic is something that's completely dictated by the reality we find ourselves in, and if you believe in God, that is dictated by God. God's not beholden to reality. God made reality, and he made logic alongside with it. So, logically, God can't make things from nothing. We have like laws of thermodynamics. We know how those work. God does that. He makes things out of nothing. He makes the water of the flood out of nothing. He makes it disappear back into nothingness. Or maybe teleports it to, like, I don't know, Saturn or something. I don't know. It doesn't say, right? So, plus, the whole Genesis story, he just makes things. He doesn't show that he has them from somewhere. The concept of God, people say he's spaceless and timeless. What does that even mean? We can't logically perceive of that. That seems illogical because we know he occupies physical space. He can be sensed, he can be talked to, he can be touched, he walks around, so he occupies physical space. You could say he leaves and comes back, but that's not something we can view. He's also given an infinite level of, most qualities, so that power, knowledge, love, whatever. Infinity is not a number, there's no real infinity, so that's illogical in itself. Infinity is just a concept. In the exact same way a square circle is a concept, we can comprehend the concept of a square circle. It's a circle that's also square. You can also comprehend the concept of being infinitely powerful. You can't imagine it, which is where I draw the line, right? You can't imagine what it would be like to be all powerful accurately, and you can't imagine what it would be like to see a square circle. You can imagine, yeah, there's a thing that is perfectly round and also has four corners. I just conceived of it right there, but I can't imagine what it would look like to a non-paradoxical level. And the way I view it is basically forcing a god who literally defines logic to be defined by our logic doesn't really work. And to do so presumes you were to know God. So arguing God is can only do what is logically possible, I don't think is logical if he makes logic. You guys have any thoughts on that? Any objections? Anything?
That makes sense.
Cool. There's a comment chain here. I don't know. I did not think of the comment chains. So if you guys want, we can explore those. You guys want to explore those, or you want to just like leave those for people to find?
I'm down with exploring them. I don't know no idea what I'm doing.
I'll call them Cube Rubik's.
Yeah, Rubik's Cube.
Rubik's, you there? You go fall asleep.
Yeah, no, I exist.
Cool. You vibing like the Snake in Genesis?
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. You want to explore the debates, or you want to just like leave them?
Believe
Okay, we got 50-50. Okay, 1 second.
I'm fine with leaving them.
I was gonna do a coin toss, but that. Okay, we're leaving them. So if you guys want the debates, whoever actually watches this, go like click on these. Okay. So, I talked about that part. Cool. So that is all powerful. Those are my thoughts, and please like interrupt me. I want to talk here. Okay, so God's all knowing. This is one of the classic things attributed to God. Other than his all powerfulness, he's also all knowing, which you could say is logically gonna follow being all powerful. Because if you're all powerful, of course, part of power is knowledge. If you don't know something, that's like a weakness. So he must be all knowing if he's all powerful. That's semantics. They're defined as two separate things either way, so it doesn't really matter. So God's all-knowing, meaning he knows, well, everything, literally everything. He knows every grain of sand, every star, every person, and all of those, his entire future as well as his own and everything else's, right? And of course, if he doesn't know any of these things, he's not all-knowing. And there's an idea that basically if God knows every future action, then no other action can be taken other than what he had foreseen. Meaning every action is forced, and free will does not truly exist. Now, the question of free will is a very annoying one, because to talk about free will, we've got to define free will, and just about everyone under the sun has a different version of free will. The one I'm going to be using is the one that I pulled off of Google when I searched it up. As you can see, look at the link, right? Free will, the power of acting without the constraint of necessity or fate. The ability to act at one's own discretion. I'm going to go with the first one. Because necessity or fate have been placed here. Because you are going to act by necessity in the action that God foresaw. You cannot choose any other action. You're fated to do that action, and he knows that. If he does not truly know that, then he's not all-knowing, and which contradicts this, which we can't do. So he must know, and if he truly knows, you can't take another action. You must take that action. Even if you don't realize you're being forced to take that action, you are, right? Um, did I zoom out all the way? Whatever, I'm back here. Now, a lot of people are going to dodge this issue, or they're going to basically do something called the observer's defense. And like the classic version of this is you're just like on a mountain, and then far below you there's a man. He's tied to train tracks. A train's approaching, and you know he's going to be run over. But you knowing he is going to be run over does not mean, of course, that you are making him be run over. You're not like you personally, the person on the mountain is not are not is are you are not taking his free will. I know how grammar works. So I think there's problems with this, mainly that, first of all, this doesn't really fix the issue of the free will because the guy doesn't have free will to not be run over, and the train does not have the free will to not run him over, assuming, it doesn't have the time to notice him. Let's say it's coming out of a sharp turn from like a tunnel or something. So neither person has free will to escape the situation, right? They're doomed to this. And what I think is the main distinction here, you didn't make the man, the train, or the mountains. You did not make that sharp turn stopping the conductor from seeing the man. You did not make the train. You did not make the man. You did not make the situation. You are blameless. But God is not. God's to blame for everything, because he made everything with the express knowledge of exactly how it would turn out. Meaning he intended everything to go the way he, intended to. People say God has a plan, and that plan would encompass, everything logically. God wouldn't overlook anything because he knows everything, right? He's a perfect being, so it's kind of outside of his nature, I think, to overlook something, right? And I also, me personally, I don't believe in God, of course, the kind of big thing with being an atheist, right? I also don't believe in free will, even besides, this problem here. And the reason I do, in short form, because it's not really super on topic, is cause and effect, basically. I believe that all effects, all actions are, of course, caused. And we as humans, we're basically little programs that take in input and then give some output. And we don't think of ourselves in that way, but that's how we act. We're incredibly complex. And so, given an input, we output some value. And so, given the exact same input, a person will output the exact same value. The way I try to phrase it now is imagine, the past, right? Of course. The past has already happened. And the people in the past have already made their actions. If you reran the past again, presumably all the same actions would happen. Because all the exact same inputs were in there, and so you get the exact same outputs. The machine in the exact same state will produce the exact same results. Right? That's how I think of it. And so if in our God situation, God knows everything, there's only one line to the future, just as there's only one line to the past, basically meaning, since everything's just a single chain that's already known, it's basically already happened. And so there's no free will in that. That's how I think of it anyways. And that I think of that basically with a God or without a God. I don't think there's true free will. I think we still make decisions, and we still can't predict everything that's going to happen. We're not very predictable machines to ourselves. And so I don't believe in free will for that reason. Thoughts, disagreements, agreements, additions?
Agreement.
I'm pretty sure that's called chaos theory. I'm not 100% sure. I might be getting it wrong, but
For my personal belief or the God
yeah,
all-knowing
for
thing?
your personal belief.
Maybe I haven't actually looked for a name. But yeah, that could well be. Maybe link it in chat, and I will take a look after. But yeah, it's completely possible. That does ring a bell. Cool. All right. Let's keep going. Right. Oh yeah, I'm not actually done with the free will section. So a lot of people say that free will exists because God wants there to be free will, and the main counter argument to this, other than the logical issues with that, is the fact that God doesn't respect free will. Depending on which God concept you're thinking about, you have a bunch of examples. And I'll leave the one I have in text for a bit later. But a classic example is hell. If we're talking Christianity, well, who goes to hell? The people who don't listen to God, the people who do what God doesn't want, right? Okay, well, if you're not doing what he wants, so you're disobeying him, you're exercising your free will, and you're being punished for that. It's hardly free if there's a punishment for doing what you choose to do, right? But that's like, you could argue, that's just a consequence of your actions. That's not really a violation of free will. You could say you have free will there in the same way you have the free will to not pay your taxes. And it's like, sure, you can argue that. But to the example I have in text, God explicitly steals people's free will. In the Exodus narrative, you may have heard the term hardening Pharaoh's heart, or Pharaoh hardened his heart. Pharaoh does not harden his heart, God does. And this is very explicit in the text. Here are the numbers, if you want to double check me. Here's, I think, most of the places where explicitly God either says he's going to harden the Pharaoh's heart, or he just does. And what does that mean? Well, basically, the way God generally phrases it is, and I'll just grab Exodus 4:21, because that's the first one. 4:21, boom, and let me get some Bible Gateway right there. Cool. The Lord said to Moses, when you return to Egypt, see that you perform before Pharaoh all the wonders I have given you the power to do, but I will harden his heart, so he will not let his people go. Right? And I do not need this. Studies of the Messiah study guide. It's okay. The way this is phrased, and we can check the Hebrew as well, but the way this is phrased is that he is going to harden the Pharaoh's heart so that he will not let the peoples go. I mean, really heavily implying, almost explicitly stating that if he didn't harden Pharaoh's heart, the people would be let go. If this is unnecessary, if he was going to hold the people hard or not, hardening is redundant, meaningless, and doesn't do anything. It's a stupid action to take. It's useless, and God would know this because he knows everything. And if hardening his heart does change his mind, God's forcing him, by altering his mind, to follow through his plan. This is absolute wanton disrespect of free will, right? And if you're saying free will is the ability to just make literally any decision, even if you're forced to be affected by something, if someone has a gun to your head and force you to make a decision, no, it's your free will, you could have chosen to get shot, even then, like, this is more, it's not even like a cosmic gun. He's in your mind. He's forcing you to think differently. I think even then, it's like, I don't know how one would define free will where this is still not affecting free will, right? But that's why I believe. And if you guys want the Hebrew, let me know. You want me to go over the Hebrew? It's just about the same here. It's not like the phrasing's really different.
No, I'm fine with the English.
Okay, cool. Alright, great. So, I could also just point out the fact that God's reasons with Exodus are not noble. Like, he explicitly states, and some of these citations here do have it mentioned there, or you can just, like, look through Exodus, you'll see it. God mentions that the whole point of the whole hardening the heart and the whole Egypt thing is he's doing it as a publicity stunt, right? What he's saying is, hey, I'm going to harden his heart, and so I basically have an excuse to perform, and as he says, his wonders, his acts, his magic tricks. He's doing it as advertisement, like, look how cool I am. I'm God. Look at all the stuff I'm doing, right? And he's doing this at the cost of his own people by keeping them in slavery, and having the Egyptians do cruel things to them, probably in reaction. And of course, he's punishing the Egyptians for something that, first of all, that's group punishment, which is literally a war crime. You can look that up. Collective punishment, I think, is the exact terminology. This is literally a war crime when you take reprisals upon a civilian population for something like guerrillas or the leaders or anything else does. This is a literal war crime. And he also does mass murder of children, so infanticide, basically. These are not good things, and he does it for publicity, which I think is absolutely fucked in every manner of the word. And ironically enough, next up you have God is loving. Which that was not intentional. So God loves humanity, and will only do what's best for them, us, whatever, and he will never take action against people other than necessary ones. As we can see, that's obviously not true, but that is what people say. Right? So, the example I get often for, like, hey, God does this evil thing, the example I've been given is that good parents, punish their children when they need to. And the example I was given, which is really a poor example for the argument, as you will see, is that if a parent sees, like, their child, like, playing with, like, an outlet, like, they got, like, a fork, an outlet, they're gonna hurt themselves. And a good parent is not going to let the child electrocute themselves, obviously. And so you're gonna like you're gonna take the fork away and be like, hey, don't stick this in the power outlet. It is going to hurt you, right? The issue is that's not really an equivalent to what God does. What God does is like they see the child sticking the fork in the power outlet, and in reaction, they like stab the child with the fork, and then they just like beat them like against a wall or something, like like old Looney Tune cartoon style. Like it's absurd. It's not the same. And if you're trying to avoid harm to the child, hurting the child is not how you do that, right? That's just child abuse, and you're doing arguably worse than the power outlet even could. So I don't think this works. And then we also have God is perfectly moral, which is similar, except it's more philosophical, and there's more meat and bones to dig into. Which is basically God can't take an immoral action. So no matter what God does, whether we like it, no matter whether we don't, it's moral. By definition, God is the source of morality, meaning no matter what he does, no matter what he says, it is just by default moral. Um, and this is the source of, there's actually a school of thought, a philosophical school of thought called divine command theory, in terms of morality, e.g., morality is real and it's just whatever God says. And ignoring the situation, like how do we know what God says, right? Um, let's say God simultaneously shows up to everyone in the world through like in their brains and just says, "Hey, murder is now the one commandment. Don't do anything else but murder. Just you gotta murder one person a day or it's a sin, right? This is my example, right? If I ask you in this situation, what do you do, right? There's basically three places you can fit. And this is called the Euthyphro dilemma, basically named after one of, I think, Plato's dialogues off the top of my head, where Socrates is talking with this guy, Euthyphro, who I'm butchering his name, and they basically raise the question of, hey, if the gods are saying something bad, is it good because the gods say it, or is it bad because we feel it's bad, right? And it's much more applicable with this omni-god rather than the Greek gods, who are shown to be very fallible and, not perfect by any means. And so the most common answer I've heard to this is, God would not tell me to murder people. My question is, how do you know that? Because if you're saying that, you somehow know God and you know his intentions. How do you do that? How do you know God? You're presuming you know God. And you believe, right, that God is beholden to the same moral code you do, right? So either you believe, no, God won't do that because he's limited by some moral code outside of himself, right? Or, right, you just know exactly what God thinks and how he feels. You can't, unless there's something you're not telling me, which, most people will think presuming God is, like, not a cool thing to do. So I don't think this is something we can really go, this person knows God. They need to prove that if they really are going to say this. So that answer I don't think can work. I don't think it's really fairly dealing with the question. And then the consistent answer is, God's word is always moral, meaning you do the murder because that's what God told you to do, and so you kill as many people. It's good. It's a good thing, right? And if we look at the Bible, which of course we will see that murder and things that we would feel are abhorrent. I don't know about we. Definitely me. I hope we. If it's not we, I'm going to be scared. Um, but the Bible is very much big fan of like atrocities. And then the last option, which I actually did not think about before, which is just like screw God. I don't care what he says. I don't think he's the source of morality. I choose my own morality. And so you're going to literally follow your own moral compass and do what would be categorically wrong, assuming God is right. Right? And so you kind of rebel against God. And here's like an interesting clip of a video where this is kind of talked about. You don't have to watch the whole thing. It's like, what is that? Hour 41 minutes. It's like a 20-minute segment of like a talk call and show. And there's more of this actually, and then I'll let you guys talk. And then, quick side note, basically, if God can't do wrong, he isn't all-powerful. Because, the ability to do bad things is, an ability, and if you lack that ability, you don't have all the abilities. Now, there's ways to get around this. You basically define God as being perfect, and just saying he's like he doesn't really care about morality. There's no morality for him. He just kind of does things, and whatever he does is perfect. Um, God's no longer good, or the term good doesn't really apply because who cares about what good is if literally everything he does is good? Because really, at that point, it's just saying if God does good thing, you're just saying God did the thing that God did, which is like okay, that's useless, and so you just throw away the meaning of good to just something God did, which applies to everything God does. Cool. That was dense. Anyone have thoughts, questions, whatever?
I mainly thought that like morality, I feel like it's more of a man-made concept
Mm-hmm.
than like an actual thing.
Oh yeah, 100% agree. I would call morality it's subjective. It's completely subjective. You can create a subjective goal for morality, for example, like the harm principle. You should reduce harm and increase happiness, and then you can objectively follow a subjective principle. But that's the closest to objective morality I think you can get to, if that's what you're thinking, something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's actually a really cool argument basically saying, hey, even if God is real, objective morality does not exist. It's just subjective, but it's subjective from the mind of God. It's not objective, even then. And I would agree with that. I just don't know if that's really super document related. Cool. And then Rubik's, you're still muted. You're like alive over there.
I'm still vibing, dude.
You're not talking though. The whole point is that we engage, we do discussions. Guys, feel
We're
free to
not
interrupt
discussing.
me. Well, I
We're
am
not discussing.
reading, but you guys can like interrupt me. We can do cool talks and stuff. Like I want to be interrupted. No,
Eh,
doesn't sound very excited. Okay, I'm
ask
borny,
a
guys. I can.
question. We can discuss a question, but like if you're just reading, then
Well, no, ask me
we're just
questions.
reading.
I'll talk about them. I'll talk about questions. You can talk about questions. It'll be fun, exciting stuff. But yeah, of course, like, feel free to interrupt. You when muted. You can interrupt me while I am talking. I do not mind. That is the point. Um, like you don't have to wait for these breaks. I'm just trying to make sure people like care. Okay, cool. Next up, gods everywhere. This one's pretty simple. Gods everywhere all the time, and must necessarily be immaterial. Otherwise I'd kind of be choking on God right now. I'd be very dead very soon. This means he isn't really strictly physical. Um, which kind of contradicts with certain things, like his portrayal in Genesis. He walks around Eden, for example. Like, why is he walking? He's immaterial. He doesn't have to walk. It's a weird thing for him to do, right? And you could say, yeah, he can be immaterial when he wants to. He could also like focus himself and be material where he wants to. And it's like, yeah, that's fine. I don't have qualms with that. It's just weird for me. It's not necessarily a contradiction. It's just weird. I don't really put too much stock in that. It's like one of God's like least important traits as they go, that I think, anyways. Since he's all powerful, he can kind of just do whatever he wants in terms of his own physical form, and I don't think that violates anything. Cool, and that is God defined. Anyone want to add anything to the definition of God, or think about their own definitions of God, or what have you?
Personally, I don't really think of God as being everywhere, but like I don't know. I don't believe in God, but like if there were a theoretical God, I don't feel like he'd be everywhere at once, but
Yeah. It's also like he's immaterial as well. So, it's kind of like the parable of the invisible gardener. I don't know if you've heard of that one.
I have not.
I don't think I mentioned in the document. It's pretty short. Basically, two explorers are in a jungle. They stumble into a clearing, and it's like really immaculate. It's like wow, there's like barely any weeds. There's a bunch of flowers. Um, and one explorer goes to the other, says, "Hey, look at this beautiful clearing. There must be a gardener tending to the clearing." And the other explorer goes, "I don't think so. Let's like camp out here and see if a gardener comes." And so they camp out, and the next day, and they wait a few days, and no gardener shows up. And so the first explorer goes, "Hey, it's an invisible gardener tending to the garden." And so they set up like lasers, and they set up like dogs, and they do this whole thing to try to find the gardener. Even if he's invisible, they look for things that can like track him. They like do all the various things you can think of, right? And no gardener appears. And so, you know, the other explorer goes, okay, there's no gardener. And the first explorer goes, no, there's a gardener. He's just also immaterial. Um, and so at this point, you've gone to the point where you have not just a gardener, but you have an invisible, immaterial gardener. What is the difference between an invisible, immaterial gardener and no gardener? And the answer is really there's none. It's death by 1,000 qualifications, right? We've just qualified this gardener out of existence to make him plausible. And so that's basically what I think about the concept of God's everywhere. Because if he's everywhere in the way that like a mind is everywhere. It's just like a version of all knowing for me, where he can feel himself everywhere, but he's not like literally physically everywhere. He would break things, right? That's how I think of it, anyways.
Did
If
that make more sense? Because I was like, I don't know how I'd be like physically everywhere.
Yeah. Although of course I can't speak for religious people. I'm not, in fact, one of them, right? But that's how I view it: is that he's like mentally everywhere, but not physically everywhere. Um, it's like again, it's a trait of God that is commonly expressed, but no one really talks about it. Like to the degree, I literally forgot to actually write that when I was originally writing this, and I was like, oh yeah, people think God's everywhere, right? So I had to put that in. That's how I think of it. Anyways, okay, common casuals. This is one of my favorite sections. I really like this one. Um, well, I like this because I don't have to like address them anymore because they're here. Because these are things people bring up a lot. So, number one, men wrote the Bible. This is used to basically excuse anything that like people don't like want to excuse. For example, I was talking to someone. We were talking about like the section where the guy gets stoned in Exodus for picking up sticks. I forgot the exact chapter number off the top of my head, sadly, but it's after the Exodus, and God's like, "Hey, you guys can't work on the Sabbath," and this guy's picking up sticks, presumably for a fire or something. And then Moses' like guards catch him, and they go bring him to Moses, and Moses goes, "Hey God, this guy's picking up sticks." And Moses is like, "What should we do to him?" And God's like, "You must take him outside the camp and stone him to death." And so they took him outside the camp and they stoned him to death, right? And the person I was talking to was like, "No, the man was stoned to death for his own greater good." And it's like, okay, I don't know if I should trust you with like a rock in the future, but they managed to justify it. I think it's a terrible justification because like what? And they just brought up a bunch of spiritual like reincarnation stuff that like you can't prove, and it's like even then I don't feel like that is the great thing, and I'm not really arguing against that person right now, so it's not sensible. I think you guys probably both agree that stoning people to death is generally not in their best interests, just generally, normally, in most occasions, or I would argue all of them. But it was still justified. Then I brought up Leviticus 25:44 to 46. And that is basically the section in the Bible, not there's multiple, but it's the most explicit section in the Bible where slavery is advocated for. It goes basically along the lines of you can get your male and female slaves from the lands around you. You can buy slaves from them, and those slaves will be your property for life, and you can give them to your children as property. And it's very explicitly slavery, and then it ends with you can't rule over your fellow Israelites ruthlessly, meaning implying that, hey, if they're not your Israelites, go rule over them as ruthlessly as you want. And there's more stuff in the Bible, which, that's like later on, like hereish, we'll talk about that, but we're not really there. And people are going to argue this is servitude, but you don't keep servants for life and give them to children. They're not property. It's just, it doesn't work. They're not servants, they're slaves. It's very explicitly slaves. It was normal for the time. Doesn't make it better, but it was normal for the time, right? And so I bring this up, and the person I'm talking to, who just excused stoning a man to death for picking up sticks, went, no, 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 no. People wrote that section. That wasn't from God. And so I'm like, how do you know the difference? I didn't get a straight answer. I didn't get any answer, really. And so the only thing I can surmise is people know, quote unquote, the difference between what was God given, what was God inspired, and what was man written by what they like. So people will choose the sections they think are good, and like, nope, that's from God, and the sections they think are bad, and go, yeah, no, that's not from God, right? And the way I view it is if we admit that one section of the Bible is made by men, the entire thing is not trustworthy as a God-given narrative. And it's we can't trust it. And so we have to basically treat it like a bunch of fables, unless there's evidence to prove that the individual things happened, right? And that's not a terrible fate, you know. Uh, Aesop's fables, you guys have probably heard of them. They're well known, they're useful, they have value. They're still completely fictional, but they're still valuable stories. There's no need to believe that, whatever unnamed rabbit existed, it's we don't care. And then, my argument is basically, hey, if this is made by God, the Bible, it should be universal and perfect in every way. We shouldn't have, all these different holy books that contradict each other. We shouldn't have things that are clear moral abominations. We should not have contradictions because God would not have any flaws in his word, right? Like I said, no falsehoods, no evils, and people make the argument like, hey, people are going to like misunderstand and like get screw up the text over time. Well, here's the thing: this is God. God supposedly, quote unquote, chose to give his knowledge, his information through the Bible, the book, whatever book, not necessarily the Bible, depending on which gods you believe in, but let's say the Bible for sake of discussion, because that's what this document's about. And because God gave his word through the Bible, he knew exactly how his word would be modified, right? So if he wanted his word to be understood a certain way, he could have made his word understandable. God is perfect, and meaning everything he does is perfect. Meaning his language, how he speaks, the words he imparts, maybe not even words. He could just impart thoughts with no problems directly in someone's mind, right? And God's not misunderstandable because part of the quality of like spoken word is how understandable it is. Meaning, if he's perfect and his words are perfect, they must be completely perfectly understandable. I can English. I am not perfectly understandable, unlike God supposedly. So no one would be able to misunderstand it, right? And given this, right, God would have known that his book, the Bible, would have been used to justify many atrocities and could have had the book be perfectly formatted or inspire people perfectly to avoid this happening. And if you're saying no, people would screw it up. If God can't get the book to be perfect, he's not all powerful or all knowing, right? And here's the symbols for the first time shown. They're going to show up from now on to mark these things, and you can see the little symbols over there. So, a more common argument, other than literally God wrote the entire Bible, because no one, okay, probably some people argue that, but no one I've met really argues that one, is that the Bible was written by men based off of like the word or the knowledge of God. But the way I see it is that's literally, not literally, but just about literally the same thing as claiming it was written by God. Because, hey, if God told two people the same story because of his perfect word, it would not be misunderstandable, as I just mentioned, and so you would not have differing accounts, right? And if God gave his word, right, it couldn't have started incorrectly, and, if his perfect word was then made imperfect by men communicating, and it got mutated over 3,000 years of fucking telephone, it's not like God just didn't realize this would happen since he is, all knowing. And if he didn't want this to happen, he wouldn't have let it happen. If he wanted, the Bible to have been perfectly preserved in terms of meaning, he could have, quote unquote, inspired the people translating the Bible and writing down the Bible just like he inspired its original writers. Right? There's no reason he couldn't do this. And if you argue free will, well, we know about the Pharaoh. That's hardly free will. And we know about the original people he would have supposedly inspired if God's inspiring people. And if his inspiration is not a violation of free will, then it wouldn't be later. And so, if God's at all part of the process and he cares about his book, he might as well have written it, and it should be perfect. Since it's not, I can only conclude that his book was not written or inspired by a God who truly cares about what people, know and believe based off his quote unquote his supposed word. What do you guys think about that?
It makes sense.
It's not much of a thought.
I mean, we discussed this already, but like,
Well, yeah, I know, but now we're on like voice chat and we're getting recorded unless like Streamlabs died, which it didn't. So we are being recorded. So
Hello, recording.
huh? Hello,
Hello,
recording.
recording.
Yeah, two people are gonna like see this. It's gonna be crazy. Anyways,
maybe when you publish it in a journal, there'll be like hundreds of people watching it.
Perhaps. Anyways, Mr. Games, I think you were starting a thought.
I don't know. Personally, I just believe that I as well believe the Bible was written by people, but mm,
Yeah,
like a bit of a paradox because if he did interfere, would that be free? I feel like influencing it wouldn't really be taking away free will.
people have made the argument. That's why I bring it up. I don't think it would either.
I don't know.
But yeah, that's just an argument I've heard made as to why isn't the Bible still perfect? And people go, hey, it was mutated over years and years and years. I'm like, why can't God have just stopped the mutation and they're like free will? Because again, this is the common catch-all section, and look what's happening next. It's the free will defense. Look at that amazing segue. The free will defense generally refers to the whole morality, bad things happening free will defense, but it also kind of applies to people just going, hey, X, Y, and Z, I can't explain it, therefore free will is the reason it happens, and it's like, it's just one of the most annoying ones. It's in the catch-all section for a reason, because it happens a lot. Cool, so I'm going to be talking about the free will defense for morality, or bad things happen. The problem of evil it's basically one of the responses to that. It's the only one I really know about that isn't just, yeah, God just doesn't care. It's basically, no, God allows evil for, like, free will, because that's better. And so basically, hey, if a person does something bad, right? Let's say Hitler did stuff, right? Hitler's not a cool dude. But people are going to go, no, it's not God's fault that, like, Hitler did a bunch of mass murders. Hitler's fault. God just cares about free will, and free will is super important to him, and so he let Hitler do it because, he likes free will. He's a big fan of that, right? Um, and that's, like, an example of the argument. And then, yeah, of course, the all-knowing thing. We've talked about why I don't believe free will can work, but even if we ignore that, right, if God really values free will, he wouldn't violate it, like, ever. Which kind of screws up, like, the Pharaoh thing, and I don't remember what this one is exactly. Well, let me check it, actually. I don't remember what this debate's talking about. I'm just curious. Oh, this is actually just talking about the Pharaoh thing. Yeah, okay. That's not super related. Anyways, back to this. So, if God is, if we're to believe the Bible, willing to make exceptions of free will at times, like, the Pharaoh, as I've mentioned, the Tower of Babel, he steals people's free will to, like, work together and speak their own languages, because he literally goes, no, the people are going to work together. They can do, like, good things if they work together. I don't want that, right? The people in the flood's free will to, like, not be drowned to death, he doesn't care about free will, as he's, like, evidently sees, as we can evidently see by his actions, or his supposed actions, right? And if you are gonna constantly give yourself exceptions to violate something, do you really respect the thing you're violating? And if he doesn't respect free will because he violates it, even regarding the fact that it can't logically work, that I can see, the problem of evil you is just something you can't refute. It's just irrefutable at that point. Like, yeah, if he doesn't care about free will, why is there bad things, right? So, like I mentioned, why is Hitler allowed? Why was Stalin allowed? Why was Mao allowed? Pol Pot, the Inquisition, colonialism, slavery, and a bunch of terrible events and people that happened. And that's basically, those sorts of things are where the free will shines, right? The free will defense shines. It's like, no, God needs to let these people do their own thing. But there's more to the problem of evil than that. There's also, why do fevers exist? Why does cancer exist? This is not something part of free will. I don't think cancer has free will, really. I don't think anyone would really argue that. So why does God respect cancer and allow it to, kill people and, infect and, like, murder babies? I don't think it's like an infection, actually, cancer. I'm not a doctor. But what about all these things? People make the argument, hey, God's allowing challenges so people can overcome them. But if that was the truth, no one would die from cancer. No one would be killed by a challenge they couldn't overcome. No one would commit suicide for depression. These things wouldn't happen if these were perfectly adequate challenges. So I think that just falls apart. But since we're talking about the free will defense in relation to people, let's talk about an action, like a singular action not even like a singular person, just an action, and that's going to be rape. And the reason I talk about rape is because rape is literally the action that I cannot give any excuse, any reason in which it is ever justified. I can give one for murder, right? Let's say there's a guy and he's planning to do something bad, and you murder him because you know that. You just did a good thing, right? Let's say you murder Hitler before the Holocaust. You're a hero. Congratulations. You're like every time traveler's like dream, right? Or every wannabe time traveler's dream, since there's no reason to believe there are any. Um, so what about torture? Like that one's pretty bad. Well, let's say there's a guy, he's planted a nuclear bomb in a big city. The only way to get the information about the bomb is to torture this man. Do you torture him? You do. Because he's, you know, not being tortured is not worth the lives of, let's say, millions of people and the other bad effects from a nuclear detonation, right? And so I can justify torture. I can't do that with rape because I just don't see any situation in which there is a greater good it could serve, right? I don't think there's no ends that this achieves other than itself, right? Um, so and of course, the Bible is really soft about rape. Like depending on how you translate it, you could argue Deuteronomy 22:28 basically says that the punishment for someone who rapes a, I think, unmarried and unbetrothed woman is that as his punishment he should pay the father 50 shekels, and he should also be forced as his punishment, again his, not hers, his punishment, to marry his rape victim. Um, which is really not cool, and the reason I think it's rape, even the word is lishkav in Hebrew, which is to lay with, which is used to have, also means to have sex, just like to sleep with. Um, is it also says basically that, hey, earlier in the chapter, if like it's discovered in a city that a man and a woman are sleeping together, and I think one of them's betrothed. I think she's betrothed. Um, that she should be put to death for adultery, because if it was in a city, she should have screamed loud enough that people would have noticed, implying hey, that's rape, right? And in a field, then she doesn't have to be put to death because no one would have heard, even if she screams. So you don't know if she screamed or not, right? It was just like, yeah, that's interesting. Also, the punishment for adultery is death. We don't think that's justified here. At least I don't. I hope you guys don't. It's not a cool thing to do. It's really a bad thing to do, but death is extreme. It's not fitting the crime. But why do I bring up rape other than to talk about like the Bible and how it treats it? Well, rape is a great example in terms of like the problem of evil. Because does God value the free will of the rapists more than the people who are being raped? Because of course the people being raped do not choose to be raped. That's kind of like the whole thing with rape. It's not consensual. And so there's free will being deprived. Why is it the free will of the person who's stealing the other person's free will more important? And people are going to be like, no, you can't stop rape from happening because rape is just an action. Like, how can he stop any action? My response to that, which is in this little one here, is basically, well, it's to God. So if God was choosing what people are able to do and not do, it's not that he's stopping and he's not restricting an action. He's not taking away an ability to do something. He's just, that ability just wouldn't have been given. It wouldn't have been something that people could do if he had not given it to us. So, for example, we can't fly. We can build things that can fly. We can, touch like cold things that are like floating around. We can't fly, right? We can't like float off the ground just of our own volition. Like, my legs are tired. I just feel like floating right now. We can't do that. I can't do that. Maybe you guys can do that. I don't think you can though. So people can't fly. Is that a violation of free will? Because I can't just choose to fly. No, it's not, because that's not something we have ever been able to do. It's not something we can conceive of doing. If it's talking about like the ability to think about doing something, we can't conceive of things in the fourth dimension. Very well, at least. We can conceptualize them, but we can't imagine them. And to draw my earlier distinction, it's not something we can like natively think about. And so I would argue that's not a violation of free will. I don't think anyone would say that is, because, well, it's our current status. And if you think free will exists, well, of course, these limitations can't get rid of free will, because otherwise we wouldn't have free will. So, why not make rape the same thing? What if you literally just, I'm not going to get into mechanics here, What if it just literally is physically impossible to do that? Right? Let's say there's God has a magic detector built in. If you try to do it and there's no consent, it just you are like there's like a force field, or you just kind of pass out from like G forces or something, right? That's not really a violation of free will because we can get pass out from G forces from spinning around too fast, right? Does that destroy our free will to spin around really fast? Not really. So, with a good, loving God who's moral, in the way I believe morality works, rape shouldn't exist. What do you guys think about that?
I mean, immoral things kind of have to exist
Why?
because if they didn't, like, there wouldn't be any concept of immorality.
Okay, so immoral things need to exist to have the concept of immorality. Okay, why
Well,
not
like,
just not have the concept of immorality?
but then you don't have the concept of morality because everything
Great.
is moral.
That's fine. Why do we need the concept of morality?
Uh,
Why not just like do stuff? And you can still choose to do like nice things or choose to just not, right? That's still a choice. You can still just choose to be selfish,
do
but
stuff like,
without hurting
well,
people.
okay, then that's also immoral.
Sure, you could say that is now immorality, is the lack of morality. And it's a matter of like words, semantics at that point. But even then, if like everything you do is helps people, like what's the problem with that? Why can't that be the way the world is? We can't. That's not how the world is for us, of course. But why not? Right? I don't. You never really gave me a reason that I heard.
It never said that God created everything perfectly moral. It's just that it just says that He is moral,
Well, yeah, but if he's
which
moral,
means that there is something that is not moral, since it explicitly states that He is.
okay. And why is that the case? Why does that have to be the case? Why can't everything be moral, or why can't just everything just be? And we don't need a concept of morality because everything's nice and good and juicy and fun.
Because then it wouldn't be special that God is moral.
Why does
It
God need to
would
be
be.
special?
It explicitly states that God is moral.
Great, that's what it says. And that's in our current reality. Imagine a reality where God made everything perfectly nice and moral and everything, and there's no bad stuff. Sure, we wouldn't describe God as being especially moral. We could say maybe he's more moral than people. He does nicer things because he's able to do more nicer things, right? I just lost my track because like the screen just tried to kill me. Or not kill me. Try to kill my focus more accurately. Um, but I think in that sort of situation, it God wouldn't be defined as being moral because everything would be moral, and I don't think that's like a problem. In our current understanding, sure, that doesn't work because, well, our current understanding is in a world where we do have a morality. Do you get what I'm getting at?
Yeah,
Cool. Any like more thoughts, or like, if you just still disagree with me, of course, let me know. Like if you think I'm not catching something, like don't feel pressured to just agree with me.
I partially disagree, but I cannot come up with a way to explain it.
Uh, hey, tab it, and if you can think of it like later on, just like interrupt me like mid sentence or whenever, and we'll just jump back to it. Cool.
Fair enough.
All right, cool. Um, and then here's my amazing meme. Free will is more what you call guidelines than actual rules, which, like I said, is how God basically treats it. If you've watched Pirates of the Caribbean, you know what happens after this in terms of the violation of the Pirates Code. Anyways, or parlay actually. They don't have the Pirates Code. Oh, same difference. Cool. Next catch-all. Going down the list. We are less than halfway through. Okay. Okay, this one's short though. Not in God's nature. I've kind of mentioned this already. If anyone ever says that something isn't in God's nature as basically a response as a response to the question of why doesn't God do X, well, again, as I've mentioned, they presume to know God's nature, and therefore God Himself. And well, how do you know God? Please show me. And I don't. And most people won't presume to know God. They're gonna presume like, yeah, I just know God. We're bros, right? No one's gonna say that. Maybe some people will. I mean, like, no one's a strong word, in terms of like, the word no one. But I don't think anyone who's like truly sane is going to be like, yeah, I just know God. He's my like I feel his being, his essence. I just know exactly what he would do. I yeah, I think that's really all I have to say about that. And then part of God's plan. This is kind of the inverse to the non-God's nature thing, and I'll get to that. This is often used when people ask, hey, why is bad thing happening? And this is kind of the alternative to the free will defense. Even though I don't think it's valid, well, I don't think any of them are valid. Basically, the idea of part of God's plan is if someone says, hey, why'd the Holocaust happen? People are going to go, it needed to happen because it's part of God's plan for something better. Right? And so instead of saying, hey, God let bad thing happen, bad thing had to happen because it had to for God's nebulous, unknowable, and uncriticizable because it's perfect plan. Right? And so, starting off, if God has a grand plan for literally everything and everyone, free will kind of dies because, well, if everything is completely planned out, every single decision is completely planned by this all-knowing and all-powerful being who made everything happen the way he wanted to, I think free will is very much explicitly dead at that point. Because it's like not even like a soft determinism where it's just like, yeah, things are just always going to end up happening the same way. It's hard determinism where it's like literally everything was pre-planned and pre-made to happen exactly this way, right? And we're just basically puppets. So with the problem with God's plan is it basically tries to abstract away the guilt of bad things happening from God onto his plan, but the issue is God made the plan. The plan is just a direct representation of God's will. And so everything bad that has ever happened was because God willed it, because that's his plan. Everything's in his plan. So his plan includes genocide, rape, torture, ignoring bad human actions, cancer, smallpox, like dementia. Dementia's really bad. Like I'm scared of dementia. Like worse than like cancer, I'm just terrified. Like the concept of just like slowly just losing your sense of like self and reality and being trapped in just a fleshy prison with your mind just slowly killing itself. It's it's really scary.
Yeah. Honestly, if I get dementia, I'd rather like be put under than.
Yeah, it's like what sort of bastard of a being would make dementia? How can you argue dementia is for the greater good? It's dementia, right? And there's like many diseases that will go and murder babies and like a bunch of birth defects and like what did the babies do? Why are they being killed? There's a bunch of these.
Fun fact: people with ADHD have, I think, like a 4 times greater chance of developing dementia.
Shit, I like have that
Oh
though.
yeah.
Oh
I think I'm screwed.
fuck. I think we're all screwed if I think we all have it here. Oh, that is great. Now I'm going to be terrified tonight. Thank you.
Just a fun little fact.
Okay. Wait.
I can
I'm.
send you the article too.
No, sure. Send me the article. Make me more scared. Oh, okay. Like claustrophobia and dementia are like up there for me. It's like, like, oh yeah, you're 4 times more likely to get to be demented. Like, oh, that's fun. Okay, let's keep
Claustrophobia.
going.
Oh, sorry.
Hmm? Sorry.
Why claustrophobia?
I don't know. I just rational fear, like those like cavers where they get stuck and it's like they just die slowly, and it's like that's
Uh,
screwy for me. Not even that. It's
That's
just like
modern.
the hmm?
That's a very rational fear.
Yeah.
yeah.
And then I just don't like
It's
small
not a phobia.
spaces. Like I can like hang out in like a closet, for example. Like I'm mostly fine, assuming it's like there's like room between the shelves and the door. But it's basically the idea of like I can't move, I'm stuck there. It's like I don't, it's just I don't like it. It's just one of those things like really screws me up. If there's like crawl spaces, it'll freak me out. Sometimes if I'm watching like a spy movie and the vents they're crawling through are like really tight, you get that feeling. I don't know. I just kind of have it. Yeah, like Rubik said, I think it is very much a fair fear to have, but probably not to the degree I have it. But the idea of getting stuck somewhere, not being able to get out, is like and dying in like a tiny box. It's just that's not fun for me. Anyways, back to God. Um, so God's plan doesn't need to do harm, right? Because He is literally all powerful and all knowing and all loving and all moral and all this stuff. Why would His plan have harm? And if you're doing like an end justifies the means thing, it's God. He doesn't need to be utilitarianism. which a utilitarian is someone who basically believes that that every decision they should make, they should factor in how what effects will result from it, and if the effects are more good than bad, they take it, even if there's some bad. God doesn't need to do this. He doesn't need to do this moral calculus to make sure he's not like hurting more than he's helping. He's God. He can help without hurting. If he's not, he's not all powerful, right? So his plan does not need to do any harm. His plan doesn't need dementia. His plan doesn't even need genocide. His plan can just be completely nice and perfect and can have perfect amount of challenges or whatever you think is necessary for his plan without all the absolutely evil garbage that happens. Right? And if it can't do that, he's either not all-knowing enough to know how to do it, or he's not all-powerful enough to do it. You also can't claim something is or isn't in his nature if you make this claim, because if you know his nature, you also know his plan, because his plan is less, personal, less important than his nature. So if you know his nature, you know his plan, and if you're saying something isn't in his nature, and you're saying, I don't know his nature, well, you don't know his plan either, so you can't say it's in his plan. How do you know it's in his plan? Unless you're just finding his plan as literally everything, which is useless. And if someone were to unironically know God's plan, it's the same thing as God's nature. It's no one's seriously going to do that unless they are like very conceited. Cool. Any thoughts about that?
Not much about that, but I do have to go.
All right.
So, join you again tomorrow.
Yeah. Cool. All right. See you.
I
Oh wait, that's the wrong button. I was
did I do that? What?
no, I just left it for some reason because I was expecting you to leave, so my brain went, yes, I must hit the exit button. No,
Because I hit the exit button and all that happened is you got kicked.
I don't know. You just telepathically made me hit the exit button. Let's see. How long have we been recording for? That is the wrong thing. Hour and 6 minutes. Okay. Let's see. We are at God's plan. Here's the question. You guys want to keep going, or you want to? I'm gonna be here on Tuesday, so if you can do Tuesday, we can head back there, see if we get more people. You want to keep going though?
Do Tuesday.
Cool. Yeah, no worries.
I have homework to do.
Of course. Cool. Any thoughts? Let me get the recording off because I don't need like more stuff to edit.